Hey Kev, let's follow this trail over here. This looks like there might be something waiting down there.
All right. Hey, wait a minute. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I thought it was just me. What the heck is that?
I don't know what that is. Whoa, do you smell that too?
That's unbelievable. Hey, look.
What the?
Hey, look, those branches are moving over there.
What the heck is that?
Holy cow, is that what I think it is? Look at that thing.
Oh my God.
It's a freaking Sasquatch. Welcome to the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters podcast. I'm your host, W.J. Sheehan. Hello, everybody, and may I welcome you yet again to what is going to be a fantastic podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is W.J. Sheehan, and I am the author of a series of books entitled Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters, all of which are available at Amazon in paperback, ebook, and in the Kindle Lending Library. And for those of you who are into the audiophile gig, I have volumes 2 through 6 available at Audible, iTunes, and Amazon as well. So please help us with the show and help yourself to some cool listening about the Bigfoot creature. And without any further ado, may I introduce you to my brother and co-host, Kevin Sheehan. Kevin, come on in, brother. How are you?
Hey, Bill. How's it going today?
Super duper. As I told you, we had winds howling up here yesterday at close to 70 miles an hour in gusts, so it was just incredible.
Yeah, we had some strong winds down here, too, but better to have winds howling than dogman howling.
Oh, I don't even know what a dog man would howl like, but maybe it's
I don't want to know.
Maybe it's like the werewolf, you know? Oh, my goodness.
That sounds like a good guess. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to mention something to you and the listeners before we get rolling here today. I'm going to ask everybody to go back and review the Patty film again when you have time. And the reason I'm asking people to do that is take note of the fact that the creature never looks down when it's walking away the entire time it's being filmed. And the reason I mention that is, you know, for the people who think this was a monkey suit, and believe me, I'm not one of those people, but think about a big man in a cumbersome suit walking in that area where this flood had ravaged the place, debris, rocks, uneven surfaces, logs. I don't know what was on the ground over there, but when you look at the picture as a whole, you got to believe there was a lot of debris around there.
No doubt, yeah.
And this creature just walked, the only time turning its head to look at the to look at the guy filming with the camera, and then just kept walking off into the distance. And I thought that was remarkable. Now, you know, I've already said many times that, you know, from my perspective as a therapist, having studied the muscles of the body and whatnot ad nauseum, I could see the musculature adhered to the skin layer in that body as the creature moves along. So that, to me, that is an undisputable selling point about what was going on there. I don't know any costumes that are adhered to the body in such a way that they could show bulk muscles moving in coordinated movements as a creature flexes its thigh or extends the leg or steps forward, or, you know, there's so much going on there that to me rings true of this being a living creature, that the fact that it doesn't look down either was really pretty telling to me. And I'd encourage everybody to look at that film again, thinking in your mind of what I just said, and tell me if you don't think that's true.
Yeah, pretty cool. Some good insights there.
Yeah, yeah. It's disturbing to me the people that just say, or the naysayers that just say, "Ah, come on, it's just a guy in a monkey suit." It's just disturbing to me, that whole spiel.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just wish, though, that, and like everybody else does too, that there was like video that was as good as that. Sometime between when that was filmed and today, right? I mean, we see some great video, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Right? But when you think of the era and how that was filmed, and the quality of it is fantastic for that era. And then we really haven't seen anything as good as that between then and now. But we have seen some really good things. But I just wish we saw something else.
Maybe
we're on the cusp of it.
Yeah, maybe it's coming.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think
Cool.
I think what you have said rings true. That with the advent of so many cameras, that things are just going to pop up. I mean,
oh yeah, between the trail cams, the web cams out on traffic cams, etc., and then everybody carrying a phone, almost everybody carrying a phone with a camera in their pocket too.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I mean, we're here for the ride, so whatever comes
exactly.
up, we'll be seeing it and reporting on it.
Exactly.
So, what do you got today, bro? I'm sure you got something in your Felix the Cat bag of tricks.
Good old Felix the Cat.
Remember that dude used to open up that little bag and he could pull out like an inflatable raft out of it or something?
Yeah, so last week we did some pretty creepy cryptids with the demonic goat man, right? And this week we're going to go back to a legend that goes back in its documentation about 75 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, we're going to be in the United States, and if you look at the cryptid world, Louisiana has the good old Rougarou. Of course, the Pacific Northwest here has the Sasquatch, ton of Sasquatch. Last week we learned that Maryland and other states have the goat man. But this week, we're going to talk about Alabama. And, Bill, do you know what Alabama has? I had never heard of this one until I started researching it.
How about the sheep squatch?
Maybe you're thinking about the same thing, but it's called the Alabama White Thang.
Oh, my God. No, I wasn't thinking about the Alabama White Fang.
No fang. This is thang. Kind of like...
Oh, the what thang?
Slang for thing.
I thought you were talking about somebody with one tooth.
No, that might be in a different state. We may come across that yet. But apparently you're supposed to spell and pronounce, thing as thang when you talk about the Alabama White Thang.
Well, let me tell you something. I always called it thang.
Very good, very good. And Bill, I know you know, but before we get started, I'll tell our listeners that I'm quite a big fan of the state of Alabama. One of my kids went to college down there. I've been to many football games down in Tuscaloosa, so roll Tide, all you Tide fans. Big fan of the Dreamland barbecue down there. Love Dreamland. And one of my other kids went to space camp a couple of times in Huntsville, where they have an awesome space museum, including some of the original Saturn V rockets, those giant rockets. So, when I came across a while back the Alabama White Thang, I had to go a little deeper into this story.
All right. I'm looking forward to that thang.
Oh, yeah. So here we go. So the legend of the Alabama White Thang, again, it's been around since the 1940s. And it's interesting, no matter where you read about it, they always talk about it or describe it as being present in the triangle formed by some grouping of towns or counties. So you might be like, Kev, what are you talking about here? But it's funny, like they're all, I had like the maps out and I'm writing down different notes and I'm like, everybody that writes about this talks about it in being in an area of a triangle, but they seem to mention different towns or different counties that are all in the same area though. So they mustn't be reading one another's work. So it's kind of cool actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that you mentioned triangle.
Yeah, exactly.
That this terminology of triangle, the Bermuda Triangle, the Alaska Triangle, this northeast triangle that I told you I'd like to dig into at some point. And now you're talking about a triangle in Alabama. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. So, in this case, we'll talk about the triangle being between Morgan, Etowah, and Jefferson counties. So 3 counties. And when you look at these counties on the map in Alabama, they're along the Tennessee River, southwest of the city of Huntsville. So they're in the northern part of Alabama. Mm-hmm. And in this area, this is where people have reported seeing a creature that's more than 7 feet tall. And as the name suggests, it's covered in white hair.
Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of the sightings are near and around or sometimes in a place called the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge. So this is a U.S. wildlife refuge that was set up, back in 1938. So pretty rural place right there outside of Huntsville.
Well, now, big shout out to my buddy down there in Bama, Nate Bowling and his crew. This is an area that they hunt for Bigfoot. Tennessee River, northern Alabama, that area. So it's kind of interesting to me that you're kind of in his wheelhouse today
there
with
you
this
go.
conversation about the White Thang.
So, Nate, tell us about the White Thang. And if you can, pick me up some Dreamland barbecue and send it up here.
And let me tell you something about Nate and his crew. These guys are armed for bear. They're my kind of guys. When I say always carry more gun than you think you're going to need, well, Nate's got them. Good job, Nate.
Yeah, so this giant white-haired covered beast, it's known for, it has like a very eerie screech or scream that sounds a lot like a woman's scream. So, that's pretty creepy. In another description, the author talks about it as having a scream sounding like that of a panther. But I do have to say I didn't know that panthers screamed.
Maybe if they step on a nail.
Exactly. And then it's also known as being able to move very quickly, which is very similar to Bigfoot, though, too, right? When you're 7 feet tall and made out of muscle, you can get around pretty quickly.
Well, right off the bat, Kev, I mean, numerous encounters of Bigfoot are white and gray.
Yep.
And also the scream, the terminology of sounding like a woman being murdered.
Yeah.
The shrieking like, hideous scream of somebody, being killed.
Yeah.
So you got 2 things there going in the favor. And, of course, the height, 7 feet.
Oh, yeah. Big beast.
Yeah.
So a lot of folks speculate that the White Thang is actually an albino Bigfoot, which is, reasonable, I think, and or perhaps you'll like this, Bill, a large albino bear. And of course, we've discussed this over the last couple of weeks. Apparently, if someone says they saw a Bigfoot, then, most people think they were mistaken and they didn't know what a bear looked like. So,
yeah, I mean, that's just nonsense. I mean, you said out of your own lips, there's no way I'm mistaking a grizzly for a Bigfoot. It's like 2 entirely different bodily structures, their walk, their gait. I mean, there is nothing that looks like a Bigfoot.
Right. And then on some of the corner cases, descriptions. So, the probably the old 80-20 rule comes into play here, where 80% of the sightings describe it as this, white Bigfoot-like creature. But then in another 20%, they have these really weird descriptions. So believe it or not, one of the descriptions is kind of like a giant lion that's white. And another description is of something that's like a kangaroo, white with a lion's head on it.
Boy, that is really weird.
Yes, super weird, right?
Yeah, because from all accounts of Bigfoot, the head seems smaller than the body, the upper body.
Right.
And when you're talking about a lion, the head, if anything, is abnormally large for the body. I mean, that is like a real, especially a male, with the mane hanging off of it and everything. It just seems huge.
Yep. And like there's a sighting here, I'm going to read an account here of one of those corner case sightings of like the lion-like thing, but it's kind of interesting.
Okay.
Excuse me. So a gentleman by the name of Peter Gossett wrote on the website Winston County History that his aunt, Faneda Martin Smith, knew people who reported the White Thang. So this woman, excuse me, Smith told Gossett, old man George Norris, seen it over there in Enon Graveyard. Of course, my commentary is, of course he saw it in a graveyard.
Yeah. Where else would you see it? Not your backyard.
Yeah, where else are you hanging out?
Yeah, hanging out in the graveyard eating a sandwich.
Yeah, and he said it looked like a lion, bushy, and betwixt a dog and a lion. So between a dog and a lion. It was white and slick with long hair. It had a slick tail, down to the end of the tail, a big old bush of hair. Wow. So I guess kind of like the tip of a lion's tail. He leant up against a tree and fell asleep. So the gentleman fell asleep. When he woke up, the sun was just rising, and the White Thang was laying there right beside him, and it was looking at him. He said it didn't offer to hurt him or nothing. So could you imagine that? One, you're in a graveyard. You fall asleep in the graveyard. You wake up, you open your eyes, and you see this giant white lion laying next to you.
Yeah, so now we're really into... Forget about the original discussion about 7 foot tall and...
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean. Like 80% of them are the 7 foot giant white albino-like Bigfoot. But there are a lot of accounts there of this lion-like thing. And then if you could imagine a kangaroo-like thing with a lion's head.
So either 3 people are BSing us, or they're seeing 3 entirely different things.
I think it's a couple of entirely different things.
Right.
But I have to mention it because there's a lot of material out there on it. So all on this White Thang. And then another person, Madison Howard, on the website Small Town Myths, talks and writes about an interesting sighting as well, or account. So he says that his great-grandmother talked about seeing a furry white creature that watched her hang up wet laundry on the clothesline from the woods. She described this encounter. She described this encounter to my grandmother, who described it on to me, so kind of handed down from generation to generation.
Okay.
And he says, my great-grandmother supposedly talked about this creature as if it were as common as a deer or a raccoon or any other animal. She was known as a serious, practical, no-nonsense woman who would never make up any far-fetched tales. Yeah, and he writes here, it is not uncommon for the older generations to talk about the White Thang as if it were any other creature in the woods.
Yeah, we hear this a lot with these older, sincere, God-fearing people sharing a story that they've experienced. A lot of these people lived relatively reclusive lives. Houses being dispersed, over many acres of land, and people perhaps seeing each other infrequently. And when they stopped, they would talk about what happened, be it good, bad, or indifferent, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about it.
And that was a time also, when, for the most part, unless somebody was deemed a lunatic, people were taken at their word. You didn't laugh in somebody's face back then. I would venture to say.
No, I mean, and I think that's where you have the mention here too of, it's a practical person that was not known for making up far-fetched tales.
Yeah.
Of course, they had crazy people back then too. So if it was a crazy person, they wouldn't go on telling the story. They'd be more talking about how crazy somebody was, not what they were actually saying.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
So this author writes that most of the reports of seeing this Alabama White Thang are similar to Bigfoot encounters. So they're seen for a short amount of time, and then they're gone. Sometimes they were seen deep in the woods by a hunter or a hiker, and other times closer to homes in neighborhoods. So, it's pretty interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this author, Madison, goes on to talk about that there's also a great deal of folklore attached to the White Thing. So he says, older Alabamians talk about seeing the White Thing around funeral wakes, with some saying that when they were a child, they knew they would see the White Thing anytime someone passed away.
Huh.
So that's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, that's a real oddball thing,
Yeah. So then, he writes that perhaps the White Thing is an invention of the imagination, an omen or harbinger of death or bad luck. Maybe it was created to help make sense of the world long ago, passed down until it became part of the local lore. Or perhaps it's simply an albino black bear or albino cougar that's been misidentified. But I would go that, hey, it could be an albino Sasquatch too,
Yeah, well, if we're talking about the original one with the height and the size, there's no doubt about it. To me, that other thing in the graveyard, while this guy's sitting around having a cup of coffee and a few cannolis from his local Italian store, I don't know where this thing came from. Maybe there was something in those cannolis he was eating, if you catch my drift.
It's hard not to think that.
Yeah.
Something else in the thermos other than coffee.
Yeah, can you spell LSD?
But and then, they talk about in a lot of the accounts that the eyes of, again, talking about the Bigfoot-like creature, have like a reddish sheen to them, which that also lends itself to an albino. I know down here in North Carolina, going back about probably 15 years ago, we had a white deer, an albino deer in our neighborhood. And folks were talking about it, and kind of like Bigfoot, everybody's making fun of a couple of the neighbors that said they saw it, not in a bad way, but just in a joking way, like, oh yeah, when did you see that? Mm-hmm. Were you coming back from the bar?
Yeah.
And then one morning I was out in the front yard doing some work around the yard, and I saw it across the street. Big, full-grown deer, snowy white with the pink eyes.
And you saw the eyeballs?
Oh yeah.
Interesting, Kev, because maybe 2 years ago, coming home at night, there was an albino deer standing with a couple other deer right around the corner from my house. And it was like a double take. Like, what? I couldn't really believe what I was looking at. Now, this particular albino had a couple of little streaks or small patches of like what appeared to be gray.
Okay.
But for the most part, this was a full-grown deer that was, like an off-white color.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was just a little dirty,
Could be, yeah.
Needed a bath.
Yeah, needed a shower, And, of course, I told Danny about it. Danny, Kev. He wanted to bang this thing out and hang it on a wall.
Well, that's what they say, though, too, is that there's a number of these white deer are born every year, these albinos. But, of course, they don't last too long, right? Because not much camouflage, at least around here. We're not snow-covered too much,
Yeah, no, and I never saw an albino head mounted, in the form of a buck or anything.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true. So then I'm going to wrap up here with a funny story. So the White Thang is so popular down in Alabama, there's a Facebook page dedicated to the White Thang. So I was there exploring around doing my research. And this story came up on January 30th, 2017. And a woman named Teresa Dobbins Marshall wrote it from Gadsden, Alabama. And she writes, I'm going to read it to you. It's not too long, and it's fun. Here's a funny but sad story about my white thang. My mama saw it in the 40s, and I was born 1957. When I was 6 in 1963, we lived up past, oh boy, here we go, Nakalula Falls. My mama had never forgot seeing that thing and was terrified at night. My dad got put on third shift at the Goodyear plant. Daddy was in the Army in World War II, so he had guns. One was a German Luger that fired 9mm shots nonstop. Good little stopping weapon.
Yeah. Nothing like the old Luger.
Lugas. So Mama was told that the gun was never to be touched. Then one sticky hot summer night, we heard sounds. Fan got turned off to listen better. We sat under the window, sweat pouring into our eyes, listening. It got close enough. She closed the window and put the stick in to lock it. Man, it was hot. She made me and my sister get under the bed. Mama walked the floors, going from window to window. All of a sudden, we heard her scream, "It's here! God save us all! The white thang is here!" Then, bam, 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 9 times. She hollered, "I got it! I've killed the white thang! Praise Jesus!" Well, back then, our neighbors looked out for one another. Cars came flying in, men with guns. My mama was out on the front porch, hysterically screaming, "I've killed the white thang!" The men were so scared, they walked together, guns at the ready. Sure enough, there was a large white thang laying dead with blood all over it. They pulled the cars around for the light to see it better. It was, are you ready for this? Our neighbor's prize bull had got his horn stuck in the white sheet Mama had on the clothesline.
Oh, my God.
I'll tell you, I'm still laughing out loud at this one.
Praise Jesus!
So get this. And it says, "Poor man just said, 'The white thang lives. Old Blue don't.'"
Yeah, she did it as $1,500 prize bull with a Luger in the backyard.
Old Blue got 9 slugs. And she says, "We laugh now, but on that night we were terrified." Daddy locked the Luger up, and she says she hit Old Blue 9 times. And Daddy also offered to pay for the bull. The neighbor said, "No, sir, he was on your property." Was a hell of a night that will live in my mind forever.
Oh, man alive.
So I thought that was just awesome.
Yeah, I mean, if they made that up, they did a great job with it.
Hey, it's I doubt it, though. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, that was hysterical, man.
Yeah.
That bull caught up in the sheets. She's cracking off rounds like a freaking Nazi in a hedgerow.
You can imagine the guy coming up and saying, "White thang lives, Old Blue don't."
Oh, my goodness. Woo, I got to take a deep breath after that one, man. I can't get the smirk off of my face.
Yeah, so we had super creepy last week and a little funny this week. So.
Nah, that's good stuff. The white thang. Well, all right, then. Well, I don't have a white thang here, but this is one of the most interesting and detailed accounts that I think you're ever going to run across. And it came to me by way of a fella named Danny Sheehan, which, by the way, is no relation to me or Kevin. And I'm going to read to you what Danny had to say about his encounter. Now, some people have been emailing and saying, how about some guests, this and that, which is, it's not an unusual request, but I think my brother and I are both in agreement that we've listened to a fair amount of people speaking about Bigfoot encounters that are virtually unlistenable. I think you'd agree with that, Kev, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance, like
Right.
there is some merit to, the idea of having a guest, and we might add a guest now and then in the future. But yeah, I mean, I've listened to some stuff where I'm like, I can't listen to this guest anymore.
Yeah, and I'm in total agreement with him. And really, folks, this is why I have all of these accounts set down in a way that I could read them relatively concisely, getting to the point, inclusive of the details as best as I see fit. And anyways, let me move on with this account here. So Danny said, in retirement, my uncle had moved to Rutland County in Vermont. Having been employed as a graphic artist for most of his life, he also dabbled in watercolor painting as a hobby for an equally long period of time. Being a city boy for most of his life, he would head to the country whenever possible in search of some interesting subject matter to paint, with his favorite themes being fly fishermen, covered bridges, old farmhouses, and boats. He not only painted fly fishermen, but was totally taken to the hobby himself. I would go to visit him periodically in order to fly fish with him, and within the immediate surroundings of his area alone, there were many great places to fish for brook trout. It was a veritable potpourri of fly fishing pleasure. On this particular day, we headed to a place where we had fished several times in the past, it being my uncle's favorite spot to fish, and with good reason. Not only was the fishing superb, but this location was some of the most beautiful Vermont property that you will ever set eyes on. While I had fished on the rocky bank of this creek several years before, my uncle had been on the other side of the creek with an easel, using me as a model for a painting, and I have this painting in my home to this very day. We were near a town called Wallingford and were fishing a body of water known as Otter Creek. He knew a gentleman who owned an old farmstead that this creek passed through, and it was the combination of the man's property and outbuildings in conjunction with the shape and natural design of the creek in this area which made it such an outstanding location. I will do my best to bring you into this picture. The original owner of the farm had been, or the original owners of the farm had been cheesemakers and created what we now know as Vermont cheddar. I would say that the acreage was about 40, give or take a few, and there was a large farmhouse that sat in the middle of the land, as well as two very large, unpainted, and well-weathered barns. When you looked out over the farm from the elevation of the house, it was mostly cleared, rolling, terraced land, aside from a few trees that had been left for shade and aesthetics. It was comprised of a number of large sections, which were separated from each other with split-rail fences and gates. This allowed the cows to graze in certain areas, while allowing the grass to grow back. This terraced land rolled down to the edge of the creek where we were standing, with the creek itself being maybe 40 feet wide at this point, including its rock-strewn banks. Now, if you were to stand on the western side of the creek, your back would be to the farm. And if you crossed over to the eastern side, your back was now against a steep embankment that had trees of many shapes and sizes growing on it. The creek itself had grayish-colored, sharply angled stones on both sides of its bank, as well as being within it, some weighing hundreds of pounds, and most of the larger stones within the river had fish hiding behind them. For the most part, the creek was about a foot deep, but there were also some smaller, deeper pools within it. The day was overcast and gray, which I prefer over bright sunlight for fishing. So for me, it was perfect. There was not another soul in sight, and we had permission to be there by the owner. And he was away on a Christian mercy mission in South America. Being a doctor by trade, he and a medical team occasionally donated their skills and time to help others who are less fortunate than the rest of us, and so we were alone, tucked down into this creek. For those of you who don't fish, there are times when fishermen laugh and joke around, but most of the time is spent in silence and solitude. We had been quietly working the creek for 2 to 3 hours when we heard a large splash on the water that came from somewhere around the bend. I saw my uncle look in the direction of the splash, but we kept on fishing. Moments later, we heard a couple of more splashes in quick succession as we quietly began to move together towards the sounds, exchanging a couple of quiet words and wondering what might have made the noise. A splash always gets the utmost attention from a fisherman. It doesn't matter if you are in the bay, the ocean, lake, river, or creek. A fisherman always wants to know what's splashing and why. So the two of us began to stealthily creep along the bank. We both were hunched over, trying to catch a first glimpse under some tree branches. All of a sudden, I saw a long, dark arm reach down and hit the water with a splash, and my uncle reeled backwards and almost fell. He turned and mouthed to me, "It's a damn Bigfoot," and waved for me to move backward. We must have retreated about 100 yards away, moving to a point far beyond where we had begun, and for additional protection, we crossed to the other side of the creek and climbed up the farm's first grassy berm, to a point where we were about 15 feet or so above the creek. Slowly, we started to make our way to a place where we could see the creature, doing our utmost to use some bushes and small trees as cover. Finally, we reached a favorable position and hunkered down to observe its movements. We were further away, but we could see even more now than we had seen from the creek. This Bigfoot must have been so preoccupied with trying to grab a trout that it didn't stand a chance of noticing us. He was bent over, staring at the water without taking so much as a single break to look away. We watched him try to grab a trout at least 20 times without success, but he just kept trying. This thing was determined. Now, just in case you don't know, trout are extremely slimy, and this slime acts as a protective coating. It's generally only after a good fight that you are able to cradle them very gently in your hand and take the hook out of their mouth. No matter who or what you are, the act of grabbing one while it was swimming is nearly impossible, hence the creature's obvious frustration. We must have watched for 45 minutes. Still, it hadn't had any success in catching a trout. Finally, it looked up, surveyed the area briefly, and turned, climbing up the steep bank in 3 steps, and having reached the top, it walked away out of our sight. The bank that it had climbed must have been about 15 feet tall, and was on a very steep angle. When the monster had been standing next to this embankment, it had been well over half the height of this slope, and it took 3 strides up this steep embankment without using any hand grabs, before it was gone over the top and out of sight. It was absolutely out of this world. It was only once the thing was out of our sight that we began to talk quietly. When I had initially seen the arm come into view, I thought that it had to have been 5 feet long. It turns out that my uncle had seen the head and upper body at the same time, and that I had seen the extended arm. So he knew what the thing was way before I did. Its hair had some rusty-colored undertones to it, and I think that if the sun was shining, we would have been able to see even more reddish hues. The hair was actually very long, and on some areas of its body, in particular the head, I would say that it was 10 inches or so in length. It hung off the back of its arms as well. The head was shaped somewhat conical, but not pointy, and the upper part of the skull stood out much prouder than ours. Its face was much flattened, and the jaw protruded well beyond its nose. Its facial skin was also very dark and deeply furrowed. In fact, the wrinkles were so deep that they appeared as painted black lines on the face and brow of the creature. I would estimate its weight at about 1,500 pounds. The beast's back was 5 times as thick as those of the most massive weightlifters that you've ever seen in your life. I would venture to say it could probably snap a baseball bat in half with just its fingers. When we had briefly caught a back view of the creature, it appeared to me that its triceps were maybe 12 inches wide, and perhaps even more than that. Now, try standing in front of a mirror while holding a ruler next to your arm and visualize what I just said. When we saw it take 3 steps up the embankment, its legs were obviously flexed to the maximum, with the thigh muscles having bulged to the point where they looked to be 2 feet thick. The body strength that would be needed to make this motion so quickly and without grabbing so much as a branch would be off the charts in the human realm. But this thing is in no way a human being, nor is it our mutated offspring. This is some type of animal. I remember seeing a film clip of a grizzly bear running down a deer on a mountain slope. This grizzly was booking, and its musculature was all business. When I watch a deer get spooked and run on my own property, it's incomprehensible that anything else could catch it. And yet, this 1,500-pound grizzly had the wherewithal to do so. It was all so real, and yet so unreal at the same time. I know you get it, but when you are there seeing it with your own 2 eyes, it's only then that the legends can ring true and become part of your reality. Pretty bizarre, huh?
Really bizarre. Again, you got the fishermen running into the hairy man. Not atypical, right?
Right, because once again, it just proves out my point. Most of the people seeing these things are out there doing things that are a little unusual for society at large. They're in Vermont. They're on a piece of property owned by another man in this isolated creek. And bingo, here comes this Bigfoot splashing in the water trying to grab a trout.
Yeah, and they're quiet too, right? Like you were talking about that, sure.
Sure, he said they had already been fishing for 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
So this thing, they're in silence.
They're in the groove. They're settled into their spot.
Right.
And this thing's coming along looking for something to eat.
Right. Doesn't suspect them. It's got a high bank. They're around a bend. And they hear the splash, So he probably thought it was a trout snapping at a mayfly or something.
Yep.
And they started to creep around quietly, I mean, I've done some fly fishing. You're trying to be as stealthy as possible,
Yep.
Definitely not stomping through the water like Bigfoot.
Not if you want to catch anything, at least.
I'll get you, fish.
I'll kick you out of the water. Oh, man, that's a good one, now. And again, the size of the creature comes into play, with the detailed description.
Yeah, and how about the creature? He describes it as being a 15-foot-tall bank behind him. And the creature took 3 steps up the bank with nothing to grab on. That's like really weird, Yeah,
and that falls into the moving quickly category.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you climbed up 15 feet in 3 steps, that would mean that each step would have to be about 4 to 5 feet upwards. And not taking into account maybe your foot sinking in the sand or losing some of that height each time you stepped and put
Absolutely.
your weight on it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be like me bringing my foot up to my nipple line on my chest,
Yeah.
So it's crazy.
climbing. Yeah, not likely. Not likely for me.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, just crazy. And once again, the massive conical head, massive description of the musculature of this thing. He's talking about looking in a mirror and holding a ruler by your arm. A foot thick at the triceps. That's like, what? I mean,
Yeah, super
massive,
cool.
monstrous creature,
Yep.
Anyway, so that's my account, brother.
And up in rural Vermont again.
Yeah, well,
Good place to see the hairy man. Not much up there.
Yeah, have a piece of cheese and get torn apart by a Bigfoot. What could be better than that?
Maybe a microbrew and a piece of cheese. There you go.
Piece of cheese, and then the White Thang comes down the river. That's what I'm talking about.
The giant cheesehead White Thang. That'd be pretty funny. A Sasquatch with one of those, Green Bay Packers cheeseheads on him.
Yeah.
Hey, what? I'm just a Packer fan.
Yeah. What are you making fun of my cheesehead for?
All right. Well, we got some good listener mail this week, Bill, from all over the place, as usual.
Excellent.
First one comes in from Ty, and Ty calls himself the Tennessee Superfan.
Wow.
And Ty said, first off, thank you both for taking my request to revisit the Dead Falls Lake Affair. So we did that last week, and that's definitely a cool, or that was 2 weeks ago, I guess. That's definitely a cool play there. So you're welcome, Ty. He said, with being sick and only listening to your podcast while I'm at work, you guys definitely gave me more motivation on this Wednesday to come back to work. Be prepared to hear more from yours truly because my wife needs a break from all of my Bigfoot talk. Keep up the trailblazing with the podcast and Godspeed, my friends. Ty.
Ty, my advice to you is if you've got a 9-round clip Luger in your drawer, you best move it because your wife may be using it on you. You'll be the latest victim of the White Thang.
Some fact there.
Now, that's really cool, and it's our pleasure, Ty. Occasionally we'll do a repeat because there are people out there who never heard the story and may not listen to all the shows from day one.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, as long as they're spread apart by a good distance, Bill and I have different insights on the account as well, different commentary.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
Very cool, Ty, and we appreciate you listening and tell your friends.
Yep, no doubt about it. It's good. Thank you, Mr. Tennessee Superfan.
Superfan.
I want to hear from some of those Alabama superfans now that we talked about the White Thang. All right. All right, the next one comes in from Matthew, and he says, hey, guys, I'm up here in Booth Bay, Maine, and I have been binging your podcast during my early morning work hours. I love what you guys do, and I think it's amazing to hear so many other people's stories across the ages and states and continents. I have not personally seen a Bigfoot, but I write you in order to share a thought. When you consider symbols such as the Yeti for Yeti coolers, all the way over to the Sasquatch in the Jack Link's commercials, which are hilarious, he writes,
yeah,
and compare those symbols to the imagery from actual sightings, it would seem that Bigfoot is so present in everyday American consciousness that we even seem to have a singular understanding of what the hairy man looks like that is strikingly similar and accurate. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to recommend the International Bigfoot Museum in Portland, Maine. If either of you have not been there yet, keep up the good work. So a little shout out to the Bigfoot Museum in Portland, Maine. I haven't been there yet, but I love Maine, and I will definitely swing by next time I'm up there. And he does raise a good point where, you can look at an image of a Yeti or a Bigfoot, and probably universally in our society, someone would know what to call it, right?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, so pretty interesting point. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, and you know what? This Bigfoot museum up there, were you aware there was a museum there, Kev?
I wasn't, but I haven't even been yet, but I'm going to get there soon to the one in North Carolina, pretty big one in North Carolina. My daughter's been to, and she bought me a couple of things from there, which are pretty cool, including a T-shirt and a sign that I have hanging on the wall here, and a little Bigfoot doll. So good Bigfoot merch.
Is that a White Thang doll?
It's not a White Thang, but it's a new idea for the folks at the museum.
Yeah, no, and that's cool, Matt. And thanks for chiming in with us. And hopefully you'll survive your wife's onslaught, continually listening to Bigfoot 24 hours a day.
There you go.
Unbelievable.
All right, so our next note comes in from Sandy with an I in Ohio. And she says, Bill, she only mentions you, Bill, so I don't know what to think there. I won't think too much of it. But she says, Bill, love the show. Would love to hear more about your angels encounters. So that's pretty cool. Once in a while you talk about on the show, Bill, how you have run into an angel or two. And Sandy from Ohio, that has nothing to say to me, would like to hear more about it at some point.
Yeah, and you know something, Sandy? I might as well come out of the closet, so to speak, and tell you and some of the other listeners, without getting overly religious in my conversation with the audience about what happened and why it happened. But a number of my angelic encounters were in the form of what I will call a rebuke. Those of you who are around Christian circles understand what the term rebuke means, which basically is getting to the point that you're not living right, and somebody comes to take you away and say, now do we understand each other? Kind of like Dad taking you out to the woodshed and squaring away his desire for you to change.
A little intervention of sorts.
Yes. So 3 of my encounters, I'm sad to say, were of that ilk, in the form of almost a punishment for a need for a lifestyle change. So I'll leave it at that. Maybe someday I'll share some of them, but a lot of them were more of a personal nature. Which is why I don't speak of them.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at with that, Sandy. But nevertheless, whether people believe me or not, it doesn't change what happened to me. And I'm here to tell you and everybody else listening that angels are real and demons are real. And you may have to contend with one or both of them at some point in your lifetime. So just keep that in the back of your head when you're living your life.
Yeah. Be mindful of that.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole nother world that exists while we're walking around hunting for the White Thang with our Luger. You may bang off a shot at an angel and he may not be too happy about it.
Yeah, and the same can be said for Goat Man, too.
Yeah. I pity the fool that shoots me.
All right, we got 2 more pieces of mail that came in. First one is from Jose in Mexico. Right. He says, hey, guys, love the show. How about showing a little love to the chupacabra? Woo. So we haven't covered him, that little good old cryptid. Encrypted in the news yet, but it is on the list. So Jose, he may be coming up in the near future for a little bit of love.
Yeah, maybe he's laying next to somebody in a graveyard. What a nice little chupacabra.
Whoa. All right. Yeah, and our last note this week, Bill, is from Bobby in Nevada. Bobby with a Y. He also says, love the show. On the cryptids front, What about the Loch Ness Monster? What do you guys think of that cryptid? So I don't know, Bill, what do you think of the Loch Ness Monster?
Well, again, I think it's legit. And that goes back to, again, we revisit, how we were talking about the woman being stated as being a credible and no-nonsense witness when we were talking about the...
the TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
The original accounts of the first or second sightings of the Loch Ness Monster were brought forth by some real legit people that wouldn't be... You remember, Kev, a couple of months ago, we were talking about Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, Joseph,
Yep.
Being a witness to the Bigfoot. And then we were talking about Teddy Roosevelt. And, the list just goes on and on. But just because you're not a member of royalty or a future president doesn't mean that you can't be deemed a credible and upstanding witness and or citizen having testified of seeing something.
No doubt, yeah.
And to me, the first couple of encounters with the Loch Ness rang true to me and legitimate. Now, where this thing is and why it isn't being seen, I mean, I'm a fisherman. You're not generally going to see fish. How often have you ever seen a shark, Kev?
Yeah, just a couple of times, but that's good enough for me. But I mean, your point is like the ocean or the loch, in the case of the Loch Ness Monster, I think that thing is thousands of feet deep, by the way, as I recall. And, how often does something actually break the surface of the water for you to see it? Or how often does it break the surface of the water and you happen to be looking for it? So first off, it has to be daylight hours.
Right.
And second off, it's got to be in a place where people are looking. So it's pretty rare, and I have an easier time believing that these unknown creatures exist under the sea or in these very, very deep bodies of natural fresh water. It's easier for me to believe that they exist than sometimes that some creature would exist on the land that's unknown.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just completely unknown and unexplored. So why not? So we'll look into Nessie. And by the way, there's a couple of other, mysterious sea-bound creatures, cryptids that are less well known than Nessie that we're going to look into as well.
Yeah, also you have Champ up in Lake Champlain.
Exactly.
I mean, he's another similar, this plesiosaur-looking creature.
Yep.
And one of the best-known sightings of Champ was on basically a day tour boat of sorts with like 30 or 40 people on it.
Yep.
And they're standing around the rails, enjoying the day, having a martini or a hot dog, whatever they're doing. Yep. And blam, there's this creature, and everybody's like, holy cow, look at that, it's Champ.
Yep.
No, they all saw a bear.
Yeah, that's right. It was a bear.
Yeah,
maybe a squirrel.
Swimming bear in a wetsuit with a snorkel.
Well, if you don't know what it is, Bill, it's a bear.
It's a bear.
Even if you think you know what it is, you're probably wrong, and it's a bear.
Well,
all
that's
right,
excellent.
folks. So before I hand it back to my brother, just want to thank you. Been getting great reviews. I'm going to ask you again, if you like what you're listening to on your favorite podcast player, just click it and give it 5 stars. The most important thing about that is you bring more listeners to the podcast, and that helps us to continue and even improve the quality of the entertainment that you receive. So thank you for your great 5-star reviews.
Awesome. And also, folks, please remember, you're buying one of my books for yourself or for a friend really helps us out. So please do take advantage of that, and you'll be deemed as a good supporter of the podcast. And as we cut the ties yet again for another day, may I remind you, always carry more gun than you think you're gonna need. Sleep tight.